Hey, this is Zach Log the Great, and I am here tonight with my friend Nate,
It is I.
and we are joined this evening also by Harry Seldon.
Good evening.
And we are getting together tonight to spend some time talking about a book instead of a poem. Tonight we are covering Edgar Rice Burroughs' novel, The Tarzan of the Apes. Um, and before we get into the discussion, I just wanted to remind everyone quickly, if you like my work, if you like what I do, you can support me via subscribestar.com/Zachlog the great. And the link is going to be in the show description. So, having said that, I actually entered. Let's get to the book. I actually finished rereading it for this discussion just yesterday and found out to my surprise, that I read it for the first time 6 years ago. And I'm like, wow, it's been that long. Um, but I think, well, I think I'll let Harry lead off in a minute. I will say one thing before that. I started reading this book because of the blog posts for about Appendix N of Dungeons and Dragons by Jeffro Johnson, and I've also looked up several other books and authors from that, and overall it has been a very interesting experience. And so I would suggest looking up Jeffro Johnson, and also Appendix N, either his book or just the D&D, the original D&D Appendix N. That's a list of books and authors that the makers of D&D recommended to people playing D&D, to kind of get ideas for how to create campaigns, what kind of stories they could go into. And it's a very interesting collection of authors and stories, most of it from the early 20th century. Very fascinating stuff. So, Harry, would you like to lead off with your overall thoughts about the book, and big kind? Oh, one other thing for those watching: this is really not going to be a review in the style of "Do I want to read this?" There's going to be spoilers all over the place. So if you haven't read it already, it's probably best to go read it and come back, and I will recommend it. It's a fascinating book.
And I will add to that. You might think, oh, well, I've seen adaptations. I really can't be spoiled. For some works, like for A Christmas Carol, for instance, which we've discussed previously, if you've seen the adaptation, they're basically identical. Here, I'd seen the adaptations. There are interesting differences, differences that you might not expect going in. So if you're interested in the book, I recommend reading it regardless of whether or not you've seen the movies or the cartoons. As for overall thoughts, you mentioned that you were reading this because of Appendix N. I also was interested in it because of Appendix N. And as a result, I couldn't help but read it in the context of an RPG, in the context of developing character backstories and so forth. Obviously, that's not what Edgar Rice Burroughs had in mind, but the thought, the connotation was there. It's odd in that there are various scientific inaccuracies present in the book that I don't think bothered me at all. I don't know, maybe it bothered you, but it didn't bother me at all. What did bother me was a sense of game balance. After reading this, all I could think was, how in the world did civilization ever develop if being raised by apes gives you superpowers in every field? It maxes out all of your stats. That I couldn't quite figure out. So that was interesting. But the story itself was quite good. The characters, including the apes, were all portrayed as very distinct, followable characters. My favorite was the professor's assistant, Samuel T. Philander, who was not in the Disney version and who I think would have been a fine addition there. And yeah, I did enjoy it. But game balance wise, it's odd.
Well, okay, now I will say, like, how did we, for the answer of, if, being raised by apes, gives you all this stuff, then how did civilization develop? It wasn't any random person. It was it was an Englishman at the height of the English Empire who, at least, from the point of view that, Burroughs adopted for writing this novel, is the pinnacle of the human species.
Sure, but notice that his father did not have superpowers. He was significantly not just stronger, because being stronger makes perfect sense if you're raised by apes, according to the sense of game balance. You're sacrificing one thing, the various aspects of living in civilization, for another, the sort of physical strength and agility and endurance that comes with constant activity. His father did not seem to be either super strong or, in this case, super intelligent. But Tarzan is. He's able to pick up multiple languages in a matter of weeks once he makes contact with civilization. I think if his dad had been capable of doing that sort of thing, the story would have made a point of it.
It's I've read a couple of other of Edgar Rice Burroughs books, and in most of them, like there's like at least one story point that just breaks suspension of that just like pulls suspension of disbelief absolutely to the breaking point. And so in this one, it's Tarzan, human child, from the age of about a year on, raised, by and among apes, and he learns to read written English all on his own without any other people around. I'm like, oh, that's.
But at least there, it explicitly said it took him 9 years to do it. And, the comic book fan in me says, okay, I can hand wave a lot of montages, a lot of training sequences into 9 years. Yeah. It's the fact that he can then learn how to speak it in like 2 weeks. That was that was what kind of pushed my suspension of disbelief. And by the way, I'm leading off with this. That is not to say I did not enjoy this book, but that was the most surprising thing about it, perhaps. And one can understand why a lot of the adaptations have the "me Tarzan, you Jane" sort of dialogue for him at first.
Yeah, well, and also one interesting thing, and it's not specific to this book, but like talking about this like in the context of like Appendix N. One interesting thing I've seen, and I don't entirely know what to make of it, in science fiction and fantasy in particular. Okay, Dungeons and Dragons and other related games kind of grew out of fantasy and science fiction storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically at a certain point, everyone who was writing and publishing these had also been playing those games. And then there's this weird reverse effect, it seems to me, where the game mindset is influencing the storytelling post game, in a lot of ways. Like the most obvious example of this to me would be Brandon Sanderson. Like, you can take most of his books and like start breaking it down into like character classes and stat and different stats, relative, like, it seems almost built for that. And it's kind of interesting seeing how A created B, and then B kind of washes back and reshapes A.
Mm-hmm.
Is an interesting.
Links to explain how the magical systems work. It's like hard sci-fi magic. These are the rules.
Yep.
And so if there are already rules in place, you just have to, sort of, carve the molding a little bit. And yeah, sure, you can gamify that really easily.
And in fact, you see this especially with magic. It's rare to see a fantasy book in which magic isn't just an alternate set of laws of physics. It's rare to see a fantasy book where magic is sort of ill-defined or vague or in the background, like it was in most of fantasy pre-1970.
Yeah, like, I mean, Tolkien's or
Yes.
or C.S. Lewis. Magic, like, it's never super clearly explained in any of those, what magic can and can't do. It's just, there is magic. Here's the thing magic does. What else can it do? It can do stuff. It comes up once in a while.
Yeah.
And you definitely do not see that kind of thing much anymore.
And it's a bit like nuclear physics, just sort of like, oh yeah, oh we need to do something very powerful. Bring out the nuclear physicist. Okay, thank you, nuclear physicist. Retreat into the background. Very good.
Okay.
I kind of miss that, to be honest, because sometimes being like, oh god, what are they gonna pull out now? Oh dear, here's a dude with a pointy hat and a beard. Something stupid's about to happen. Whole story's about to take a hard turn. It's gonna be like, is it gonna be good? Is it gonna be bad, or is it gonna be retarded? I can't wait.
Okay, so to return more strictly to Tarzan, one thing I found interesting, and I don't think I paid as much attention to this the first time through, but and I had the actual number. I don't remember it now. Like, at least 10% of the book is actually just setting up how he got there, and like who his parents were, and how this whole thing got started. Which I don't think. That's another thing that I don't think is as would be paid as much attention to these days. Because like the first at least 2 chapters are about his parents, and like how they wound up there, and how his dad, you know, to take care of his mom, built this, with his
This
own
Family
hands.
Robinson type house, yeah.
Yeah, and built it really solid and secure, so that like 20 years later, actually more probably, 25 say years later, like it's actually still standing and still able to mostly withstand, for instance, an angry lion trying to claw its way in. And I like the attention to like how did this happen, and who, like, it seems like in a lot of more recent fiction, like the character's parents and family is more or less, a lot of it's kind of vague and like shadowy. No, not paid attention to a lot. It's like, no, that kind of matters. Who is he, and where you came from and who you are. It's pretty connected.
I mean, a lot of those sort of, origin points are just long enough to give you the poignant flashback later on. Like, I've been like, the sword's still sticking out of him, and he's like, falls down, and it's like, oh no, everything's going dark. And then they see that, one instant, that one memory we have of his dad, like, got his arm around him, looking out over the fields before the ravaging came. And he's like, no, I can't die. I would have failed my father. And then he gets up, and all of a sudden the blood stops, and he's like, ha ha ha, reverse.
Okay,
We
counterpoint.
we get to watch Uncle Ben die yet again in the next when they restart Spider-Man.
I was just about to say that, yes, in comic books, being an orphan gives you superpowers. And all right, we generally see it every origin story. We generally see you spend at least the first third of it, at least as much as they spent here, as Edgar Rice Burroughs spent here, establishing family. And so you have Batman, who is an orphan; both his parents were killed. And you have Spider-Man, who's an orphan and a half because his parents died when he was young, and then Uncle Ben died, and so he has powers. And then Superman is actually a double orphan because his parents on Krypton died, and then the Kents died when he was a teenager, and so he has powers and abilities beyond that of those of even normal orphans. So we do see family, and I'd be hard pressed to say that comic book films and such are not popular forms of entertainment today. I'd say a decent number of them spend time setting up the family as part of the origin story.
I will give credit to the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man stories because they had May in there for 2.5 movies.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiler alert. Yeah. So, and then they finally kill her, and you're like, oh wow, okay, yeah, she's been a part of this. It's awesome. But no, what it's going to be, it's not that being an orphan gives you superpowers. It's that it condenses the family ninjutsu. Conservation and ninjutsu.
Good point.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, so all of the ninjutsu in the family ends up going into the one kid. That's why he's stronger, faster, smarter, harder. Like, I've got 3
It's
siblings.
also why none of them have siblings.
Yeah,
you're right.
I've got 3 siblings and 2 parents. If, God forbid, I don't want this, but if they just all got Thanos snapped tomorrow, I would be inconceivably powerful.
like Jet Li, the One. We're operating under those rules, or Highlander.
Yeah, exactly. Dr. McNinja.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see.
Zach
in
and I
terms-
are going to keep going off on tangents. I warn you in advance.
It's a tradition.
That's kind of what happens a lot. It's okay.
Let's go back to the book and mentioning that the adaptations annoy me in one thing. Edgar Rice Burroughs goes out of his way to make all these really interesting names for the different creatures, to the point that he distinguishes between lion and lioness. But then the Disney
that was
thing,
an accident, actually.
Oh, really?
I just saw someone talk about this. Apparently, Sabor the lioness, that was originally supposed to be a tiger. And then someone was like, Edgar, there are no tigers in Africa. He's like, oh, I guess it's a lioness now. Which is actually also only a slight improvement. There are lions in Africa. They are on the savannas, not in the jungles.
I mean,
lions don't live in the jungle, but that's okay. But anyway, it just reminds me that, like, the Disney, the sort of Disney animated remake, they're calling freaking the leopard Sabor. And I'm like, I'm looking, I'm like, oh hey, Sabor. They're like, it's a lion. I'm like, oh, Disney lied to me. You jerk. I could never have seen this coming. My poor trusting kid soul. But yeah, like, oh, it's cheetah. And that's, well, I guess I can understand why they couldn't go around yelling, cheetah, cheetah.
Yeah, okay. The options were not great there.
But yeah. So, and that was just a lot of fun. Very much enjoyed the book, and I think the reason they spent so much time talking about, our first meeting with the Lord Greystroke is so that, later on when Tarzan has to, not eat the black guy and, not let's just say have wild revels with the young lady, they have something to fall back on. Like it's his birth. It's his noble blood. Yeah, that's why these things that would probably absolutely happen didn't happen. And I'm reading it and I'm like, thank God this was written 100 years ago.
I had exactly the same thought. Verisimilitude is irrelevant. I'm glad Edgar Rice Burroughs wrote what he did and didn't write what he didn't.
Yep. I was just like, and if it's written today, like I'm like reading this book would kill a millennial.
Oh yes, if you want some amusement, you can go on Goodreads and read some of the click on the 1-star reviews for Tarzan of the Apes and oh, it's racist, it's this, it's like that. Look, if that genuinely bothers you, just don't read anything written before 1950. Just, you have closed yourself off in this tiny little box. If it pains you that much to look outside of the box, just, then don't look out, but don't try and, spray graffiti all over these things you really can't comprehend.
To be fair, it was only, I'm looking at Goodreads now, it's only about 1% that gave it 1-star ratings. So that's not a universal opinion.
Yeah.
Well, that's also.
Like I said, the sort of the casually racist stuff in there is like, yep, that's very much early 20th century thought.
Well, and Darno even calls Tarzan out on it at one point. It's not even when Tarzan immediately assumes that the black tribe that they're walking to are mortal enemies and prepares to start killing them. Darno says, "What are you doing? Like, you haven't even met them yet." And this doesn't even go unremarked in the books themselves.
Well, and it's the other thing is in his personal case, it's like, oh yeah, those are that is the kind of creature that killed my mother, and that is, and from basically, give me a second. The way the story is set up, all lions are Numa, all elephants are Tantor. That's not an individual name, and so you can kind of see from the way he sees the world, basically until he joins civilization, all black people are the people that killed his mother.
Right. I mean, given that the purpose of Lord Greystrokes coming over to Africa in the first place was the unfair treatment of black British subjects by the officers of a friendly European power. I'm reading from chapter 1. I would be hesitant to say that this has a uniform. There's a uniform racism on the part of the author here, because clearly there isn't, even though there are characters that absolutely are. If you want to complain about Esmeralda's dialogue, I would be open to that. I'd be, if you want to say that that's not in great taste, yeah, okay, I'll probably give you that one. But I would not say that it's a uniformly racist book.
Oh no. Like I said, it's more that it contains it and it portrays it.
Yes.
It's like Huck Finn in that sense, and that we're not flinching away from that this was a thing, and we're not even spending a whole lot of time dwelling on whether it's a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Call it out in the characters that would call it out. We're going to embrace it in the characters that would. It's a very true to life rendering of sort of some of those beliefs, and so it's like that's actually, as nasty as some of these people could be, it's actually kind of refreshing.
Well, it's also kind of funny because I remember thinking this, okay, Tarzan, chases down and kills the black man that killed Kala, his adopted ape mother. And I was like, okay, so, and then it says something about how he looked at him. And he was like, I'm not like the other apes. I'm also not quite like this guy. And I was kind of wondering. I think I made a note of it. Like, what is going to be his reaction when he first sees other white people, and then basically the very first other white people he sees, like the first thing he sees is one of them committing murder, and he's like, wow, these don't seem too different from those black people. and then he's like, and then he sees like other white people, and he's like, oh, okay, some of them are different. It's like, okay, but it's oh crud, something I was gonna yeah, I'll get it back. Oh,
Samuel Philander and the doctor earlier, and I cannot express to you how much I was rooting for Numa to catch that dumb SOB. You are in the jungle, you idiot. What are you doing? Get your head out of your academia and get on around to survival.
I loved Mr. Philander's sort of exasperated trying to take care of him. When they see the lion and Professor Porter says, how did that lion escape the zoological enclosure? We really ought to issue a complaint. And Mr. Philander immediately says, yes, I believe the office is that way. Let's run. Very, very sort of practical answer.
See,
Tut, we don't run. We're men of science.
Yes.
See, I am actually kind of in a weird way on the other side of Nate from this. Professor Porter, I think, is in some ways my favorite character, in the sense that, like, I find the way he's described, like, totally believable, in that, like, well, not just totally believable, but, like, that there's an entire human person there, because he is so, head in the clouds, academic, totally lost to practical matters. And then every once in a while, something snaps him out of it, and he's like, what is it? He says to Philander, like, should I beat the crap out of you like I did when we were in third grade? And I'm like, that is a very human moment, and I like this guy.
You had that when Jane was kidnapped too, and it. When they got Jane back, he sort of dropped the academia for a bit because he was genuinely relieved. And it took him a few scenes to put the mask back on, so to speak. And then
when he did, because you're right, when he drops the academic nonsense, I'm like, okay, kind of like him. But then he's back into Mr. Philander. If you want to use, the inaccuracies of jargon and you're fine, that's a lie. Like, my man, just getting ready to unstring your guts. Maybe you should go with something that's 2 syllables instead of 19 to describe it. Oh, dear me, I seem to have been struck dead by a, Felis lioness miscabus. I say, it struck me right about my colon. Terrible. I'm gushing.
The train is fine, Professor Porter.
I will say, for the record, every adaptation assumes that an absent-minded professor has to be British. It does establish that he's from Baltimore, that he is not British in this one.
Yes.
But it's way funnier that way, so I'm not going to complain about your accent, Nate.
Yeah, no, just if I think of a pompous academic, it's got to have...
Exactly. You think Brit. There's no way around it.
Well, their whole accent is called a received accent because they received it from people who thought, oh dear, we can't go around talking like Americans anymore. We'll talk like you're from the theater. And so it's literally a fake accent. They just decided that those colonials beat us like a drum. We should start talking different.
Okay, let's see. In terms of like unexpected things, in terms of like, okay, yeah, Tarzan, I know Tarzan. and then you read the original, and you're like, I did not know Tarzan. Nate, how about you?
How important the knife was.
Oh gosh, yes,
About
okay. So
big, mighty, and he can pick up a gorilla and throw it into the moon and whatever. You never think about him being like a scrawny kid with a knife, having to use that to leverage his fighting abilities. I was like, that makes sense.
that actually was one thing in a kind of symbolic sense in this book, which is never really like hammered on or anything. It's just kind of there. Yeah, like young Tarzan goes to the cabin that his father built, finds his way in and explores it, and like finds all these things, and figures out that, oh, I'm not actually that much like these other apes of my tribe. And one of the things he finds is his father's knife, and he takes that with him out into the jungle, and almost immediately he gets into a fight and uses it unintentionally at first, and just like the image of this young man unknowingly wielding his father's weapon, like there's something like archetypal. That's the word. There's something archetypal about that, and that's really awesome.
Yeah. And just also, it's showing, it's another nod back to the superiority of civilization, because that is the product of a civilized people. It is a superior item, and it allows the naked savage to triumph over the jungle in other situations where he would most certainly have been killed, like when Bolgani jumps him right after he's leaving the cabin, the gorilla. He would have been ripped to pieces.
If he almost was anyway.
Yeah,
he barely survived even as it was.
So not only is it his father, a derivation of his father's soul, it is, it's also his civilized heritage, even if and as you said, he doesn't understand it. But it's still something that he carries with him that makes him better.
Well, and it's kind of interesting because, like, okay, in terms of his own things, like he eventually ends up like stealing a bow and arrow from the natives, from the Africans. But in terms of like his things, there's his father's knife, and like basically kind of the legacy, like actual technology from civilization, and then the other thing, his other favorite tool is just a lasso, a rope made of grasses, which is plausible. I mean, it would take a fair bit of work, but I mean, what else is he spending his time on? And it's kind of interesting, the contrast there, because like the height of civilization, and then just his own like fiddle around with things kind of cleverness. And it's interesting seeing those two kind of put together as these are his weapons, these are his tools.
Speaking of ropes, you asked Nate what kind of things surprised him about the adaptation. I'll add to that the fact that not once does Tarzan swing on a vine in this story. He does plenty of locomotion above in the treetops, but it's always specifically one branch to another. It's never a vine swing. And just, I never knew that before reading this.
Yeah, that was, and I think I had said that earlier, that was one thing that was like very clearly an adaptation for screen. It's like, it's as something like you watch, as something you watch happen on a screen. It's a lot more interesting than just that you kind of running through the treetops. It's a very striking visual.
Oh, certainly.
Although if I have it correct, like the Disney adaptation in that way kind of looked a bit more like the original book.
Yeah, he was almost surfing on branches, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
In that one. Yeah, that
seeing that as a kid and be like, how hard are his feet.
Yes, that's why I remember it. I thought the same thing.
Well, that's actually I remember seeing in one of Neil Stephenson's books, he comments on that because like one of the characters is in like Southeast Asia somewhere, and it's and he talks about like these people grew up in a place where like it not wearing shoes is common, and he's like, yeah, the soles of their feet are tougher than the soles of your shoes. um and so yeah, people who don't grow up wearing shoes have very different functioning feet than you or I probably do, in several ways, because like also regular shoes tend to squish your toes together, and does other things, but oh,
With
here.
a very interesting book. And then, like I said, he kind of follows the track of like Enkidu. He's wild and unstoppable, and nothing can tame this guy. And then he meets a girl, and all of a sudden he shuts down. And so he's like, nope, got to come out of the jungle, got to be civilized, got to do all this.
Got to learn how to shave, of all things.
Yeah.
Actually, he did that before her.
Oh, that's right, from the picture books.
Yes. That's another like I don't know how like, yeah, shaving with a knife that is kept sharp by a savage in the jungle with the tools he manages to find or create in the jungle. That's going to be pretty rough. Tarzan has a very scarred face.
I mean, to be fair, he's also had his scalp mostly ripped off by by an anthropoid. So kind of
true. Well, when he shot in the head, he's like, "Oh yeah, I've had worse."
Yeah. No, but yeah, just also I love his whole Super Saiyan thing. When things get really bad is when that streak turns red. And everyone's like, "Huh, what's that?" And he's like, "That means I'm gonna kill you now."
I'm trying to remember if that is carried on into the sequels. It's been a while since I've read any of the others. Nate's read several of them in a row over the past couple of months, whereas I've read several of them over a period of apparently 6 years. I didn't know it had been that long.
Everybody, yeah, if you go on like the Kindle app, they have the Tarzan Mega Pack for like $1.50, and it's like 4,000 pages of text.
How many sequels are there?
A number.
At least 20. There's possibly more.
Wow.
There's one of them where Edgar Rice Burroughs does a crossover and Tarzan visits Pellucidar.
Oh, the Hollow Earth?
Yep.
I'm not even against that, honestly. Like you'd have some worthy challenges for him there.
Yeah, he would do pretty well. Yeah, it's I've read I think 5 of them so far, and they definitely go up and down in quality. I remember number 1 is fantastic, absolutely loved it. Number 2 was good but not as good. Then number 3, I think number 3 was number 3 was Beasts of Tarzan. And number 3 was as good as 1, possibly even better. And so yeah, they go up and down in quality, but they're all it's a fun ride. All of them.
I really enjoyed the French criminals decided to jump him, and he just kills them all in this one room. The cops come in, they're like, "Holy crap!" So he beats the crap out of them too.
So this is something that was kind of interesting to me. I at one point, the question occurred to me as I was reading this: is Tarzan a Mary Sue?
It's hard. It would be hard for me to argue that he's not.
Well, okay, I will say now, if you stop at number 1, if you stop with the first book,
I will say,
if you stop with the first book, he's definitely not, because he does not get in the first book the primary thing he wants.
True, but I thought the whole point was that he had mastered all the civilized virtues, including honor, by that point, and that his honor meant that he was not going to get in between Jane and Clayton.
Yeah,
I don't know. To me, a Mary Sue. Oh, go ahead, Nate.
I would say that he has a lot of the traits of a Mary Sue in that he's just so good at everything. But at the same time, with a Mary Sue, it's like an unearned superiority. They always harken back to how his life in the jungle, made him better at all these things, or his stock, his breeding gave him these advantages. There's always a reason for it. It's not just it's because Tarzan's the best.
And
Tarzan, he can, he has these unparalleled senses because he survived as a child in the jungle, and if he didn't have those senses, he would have ended up like a couple of his little ape buddies who got eaten by lions and crocodiles and whatever. Or the reason he's so strong is, again, he can fling himself through the trees faster than a grown man can run on flat ground. Yeah, it's all this stuff, and so it gives reasons why he has all these essentially powers without it being just like he saw somebody do it, now he can do it. So
well, and it's also it also like starts with him as a child, and like he doesn't just get these things handed to him. Like several times he is nearly destroyed before he basically reaches this god, this demigod status. And it's like it wasn't just all handed to him. He fought for his very survival to get all of this.
It's true, and it's not. It's what you might do now is you might show him as an adult and have occasional flashbacks as sort of justification, as opposed to telling it all in one contiguous story. I don't know if that makes sense. You get a sense of sort of stolen valor sometimes when watching some characters who are too perfect or too good at everything, even when there are occasional flashbacks to that character having difficulties to sort of justify it. I will say you don't get that here. Here it is one continuous thing, and we see him weak well before we see him strong.
And that's what I think really breaks the whole Mary Sue scourge off, is that you watch him get his ass handed to him several times and face a lot of problems. And even as an adult in the the later novels, he still gets thwarted, frustrated, and has people pull the wool over his eyes sometimes. Like he gets beaten even as an adult, and the Mary Sue never has that happen. So no, Tarzan's an extremely powerful character, but I would not say he's Mary Sue. A, he earned it. B, it's not foolproof for him.
Fair enough. For whatever reason, maybe again a sense of game balance, I had no issue with any of the physical feats he did throughout the course of the book. But the fact that he was able to somehow learn to speak French and write English and associate the two simultaneously, I don't know how you're going to do that in the amount of time that he had.
Well, the other thing with that is it was a very strange complication for the author to throw in, because it's like, why imaginably would someone who finds someone who can understand written English decide to teach him spoken French? Like that's not where you would start.
Yeah, we know that Darno, his English is not perfect, but we know he speaks it because he spoke it earlier. Surely you would start with that. I get why they had the French-English complication, because they needed him to not understand his father's diary. I think they could have done it by just having his father's diary in cursive English and having the books be in print and having Tarzan not realize that these cursive letters correspond to those print letters. I think you could have done that without the language thing. Sir, go ahead.
Well, actually, I think Nate's been trying to.
Oh.
Nope. Okay. Well, the other thing is, though, handwritten stuff at that time just would be cursive. Like that's just what it would be, and it does have him read things, at least one message, from Jane.
Good point.
Now, but you could still have his father's diary in French, and then you have a Frenchman meet him and read that and end up interpreting that for him, without having the Frenchman trying to teach him French instead of English. But let's see, what else?
It's not a perfect book. It's just a very good one.
Yeah, that's my general thought. I have a lot of complaints, and I think if Edgar Rice Burroughs, I think it could be written better. I think if you were to rewrite it now, it probably wouldn't be.
No. Well, okay.
You'd have to have all the black tribesmen were secretly resentful of the evil chief, and they were very sad about the killing of the ape lady, and they didn't really want to eat that one guy, but the chief said so, and so they're actually really noble and good, except for this one bad dude who's oppressing them, and then Tarzan would probably end up, Jane would have been black. It's just it'd be stupid if it was written today. There'd be a whole bunch of stuff that just waters down everything that's going on.
A version of this could be written. A working version of this could be written today. It just wouldn't be published by one of the main publishing houses. One thing that's kind of funny, to me, I noticed this about halfway through the book. This story happens because there are three crucial plot points in this story that depend on mutiny on a ship. And I was reading this, I'm like, was this actually a really common problem at the time, or is this just something?
In the current, by the way, this is the oldest reference I've ever seen to the whole current year thing. In chapter 1, Lord Greystoke mentions mutiny on the high sea may have been common 100 years ago, but in this good year 1888, it is the least likely of happenings. So clearly he didn't think so.
Well, it is actually kind of funny though, because I could totally, in certain contexts, I could totally see it commonly being a problem, especially when the British Navy would just basically Okay, I will say I am speaking from very vague historical knowledge, but as far as I can understand, the British Navy, in some context, basically just kidnapped random people and said you're a sailor now. And it's like, well, yeah, if you do that a bunch, you're gonna end up with mutinies at some point.
This was impressment, I think, was the term.
That is the term.
In fact, it's even mentioned in the third verse of Star Spangled Banner, in a verse that gets misinterpreted a lot, as I'm sure you both already know.
Well, yeah, and the other thing is that was, if I understand correctly, that was also part of the cause of the War of 1812. It's like, no, we're American citizens. You don't just get to grab us and tell us now you're a British sailor in our navy.
But I will say I don't think that was still going on. That was certainly going on in the late 1700s. I think it was early 1800s. I don't think it was still going on in 1888.
You can still get Shanghai. which is you're out drinking and dancing, and then somebody drugs you. You wake up on a ship, and they're like, "Welcome to the crew, jackass." And then you end up having to serve out the voyage, and if they can keep you on the boat at port, you're stuck on that ship till you can escape. But if you decide, I take umbrage at this, and you fight your way free, you're a mutineer and a criminal and liable to hanging. I'm like, they kidnapped me. I didn't sign up for this.
What was where is that? Oh, so one kind of interesting thing to me, and I did not remember this until I think someone else pointed it out. Someone else mentioned it when I was partway through. Like when I see Clayton, the character Clayton in this, is the other one also John? Are there two John Claytons and one's just called Tarzan for the most of this?
No. The others is William Clayton.
William Clayton. Okay,
first,
but okay.
John Greystoke was the father. He died.
And then little. Yeah. Okay, so yes, Tarzan. His officially recognized name is John Greystoke, or John. Wait, is this John Greystoke, Lord? Anyway,
John Clayton, Lord Greystoke.
John Clayton, Lord Greystoke. There we go. Anyway, and then there's William Clayton, and it's kind of interesting because when you first see him, you're like, if Tarzan were not in this book, this guy would actually be the hero. Because he's basically the one person who actually has his things together and is prepared to defend this group of castaways. And then like, oh, he's in love with Jane. It's like, well, I guess that's not going to work out very well for him. Which happens in the second book, and I don't remember how it happens anymore.
Do we want to do spoilers for that, or do we want to talk about that book at another date?
I'll leave that out for now. But it was kind of funny to me because I remember reading this. I'm like, he seems like a decent guy. It's too bad he's gonna die horribly somewhere along the way. And it actually reminded me a little bit of like a comment I saw someone make about the Jim Carrey movie Liar Liar. And the character of Jerry, I think it is, in Liar Liar, because basically the movie is kind of what's Carrey's character? Anyway, about Jim Carrey, getting his wife and his son back. Well, his son and then kind of his wife, or it's hinted at, and it's like. And for that to happen, his, kind of romantic rival has to be shuffled off. And usually the way a storyteller does that is they make this other person somehow not great, somehow someone you want to see. But it's like, there's actually nothing wrong with Jerry in Liar Liar. He's not a bad person. In fact, in a lot of ways, he's a much better person than Jim Carrey's character is at least at the start. But he kind of has to be pushed aside. And I kind of feel the same way about William Clayton. Like, he's not a bad dude in any respect. And it's possible. Well, yeah, I don't know.
He's like Ryan. He's like Ryan Lochte. Does anybody know who Ryan Lochte is?
I can't say I do.
He was an excellent swimmer, a very excellent swimmer, but he was also on the same Olympic team as one Michael Phelps. Ryan Lochte was really, well, I mean, he's not dead or anything, but I think don't know if he's doing the professional swimming. But the dude was good. Like, if it weren't for Michael Phelps, he would have been Michael Phelps. It's just that he had terrible cosmic misfortune that the things he was competing in, he was competing alongside teammate Michael Phelps. And so you'll see a lot of it's like, yeah, here's Phelps, and then just just a touch behind him, Ryan Lochte. And so it's just like, poor guy, because like,
Right.
dude is a crushingly powerful swimmer. He's just up against a mutant. So reminds me of that, because like I said, I like him. I'm like, yeah, Clayton's a good dude. And the only real moral failing you see him have is when he learns toward the end of the book that, my God, this African wild man is actually my cousin and the rightful heir to everything I have.
Does he learn that in this book or in another book?
No, this book. No, actually, in this book, Tarzan, it concludes with Tarzan. Tarzan finds out, by the way, I am the real Lord Greystoke.
Yeah, and he doesn't say it. He doesn't tell anybody that he's Lord Greystoke.
Crumples up the telegram and throws it on the ground. William Clayton sees it, goes over, looks at it, and is like, oh no. But then Tarzan just leaves. Actually, in the second book, as he's dying, he gives Jane, I think, the paper. And she's like, what is this? And he's like, ask Tarzan about it.
All right, I know you were joking. I know you were joking about reading the whole book, but let me. I flipped to the end. I'll read just the last bit. Here's a message for you, forwarded from Baltimore. It is a cablegram from Paris. Tarzan took the envelope and tore it open. The message was from Darnot. It read, "Fingerprints prove you Greystoke. Congratulations." As Tarzan finished reading, Clayton entered and came towards him with extended hand. He was the man who had Tarzan's title and Tarzan's estates and was going to marry the woman whom Tarzan loved, the woman who loved Tarzan. A single word from Tarzan would make a great difference in this man's life. It would take away his title and his lands and his castles, and it would take them away from Jane Porter also. "I say, old man," cried Clayton, "I haven't had a chance to thank you for all you've done for us. It seems as though you had your hands full saving our lives in Africa and here. I'm awfully glad you came on here. We must get better acquainted. I often thought about you, and the remarkable circumstances of your environment. If it's any of my business, how the devil did you ever get into that valley jungle?" "I was born there," said Tarzan quietly. "My mother was an ape, and of course she couldn't tell me much about it. I never knew who my father was." So if Clayton picks up the paper, it must have been in the sequel because it wasn't here.
Okay. Yeah, because the sequel picks up almost in very soon after. So yeah, I guess he picked it up then. Well, I misremembered that.
I don't doubt you that happens at some point, but from what we see in this book, yeah, I don't think he commits any crimes, even the crime of concealing Tarzan's identity.
What was
Yeah, I went straight from one to the other, so it kind of all blend together there.
What was? Go ahead.
Clayton's a decent fella. To be honest, like I said, he kind of gets done dirty in the next book.
Yeah, but he's the hypotenuse of the love triangle, and those never last long.
You can't persist in that role.
No,
I mean you kind of hope to find some other perky gal that would be a good to shuffle him off with. Like, oh man, there finally comes a fracture point where Jane and he have to realize that this isn't going to work out. So here's a palatable alternative, buddy. Go off and be happy.
But the other problem with that though is for Tarzan to be Lord Greystoke. Not only is he not getting Jane, but basically everything he was brought up for just kind of vanishes, and finding another woman A is going to be pretty darn difficult in those circumstances, and B isn't really going to fix the whole problems.
Look, Tarzan doesn't. I don't understand. Another thing I didn't understand is why Tarzan spent so much time in England. I feel like he wanted to be in Africa. Let him and Jane go live in Africa and have William Clayton manage the properties from England. He still gets to have a position and the riches and all that, and just, hey, be our manager. Be essentially a retainer for the family. You're of the lesser branch. Serve the higher, nobler branch, and just take care of this for us. I mean, the English did that for the French for 500 years. French nobles owned everything, and then some English dudes are over there managing their estates in England, while the actual noble born were over there in France dealing with matters of court. There's precedent. He doesn't have to take everything from the man, although the title.
So one thing, one of the notes I have here, there's the one chapter in this book. It's called it's chapter 20, Heredity, and Tarzan rescues Jane from Kerchak, one of the male apes who had grabbed her and run off with her. Tarzan and him fight, and Tarzan ends up killing him and rescuing Jane, and then he basically carries her away. Didn't really have a plan until he until he's like, wow, it feels really nice to have this pretty girl in my arms right now. And he takes her to this clearing, and he builds her this shelter, and he goes and gets her food, and and she just basically melts in love with him. And I'm reading this, and I'm like, you could take just this chapter from Tarzan of the Apes and just pretty much substitute it for 100 books written on gender relations over the past 20 years, and it would be a lot more instructive and a lot more useful.
Wow. That is one thing, is that dude's a manly man. Most of the guys in the story are, they're manful in the way they handle themselves. Even the bad guys, in the coming books, or at least, they're properly vengeful. They they pursue things with vigor. There's none of this sort of namby-pambiness you run into.
Yeah, even like we were saying at the beginning, even the professor, he is fully willing to go into the jungle completely unprepared to rescue Jane if that's what it takes. Like, this wimpy guy he's willing to do it.
Well, and also the other thing, one of the lines, like I said, in some ways I think Professor Porter is one of my favorite characters in this, and one of the parts of that is when he gets frustrated in his argument with Flanders, like, am I gonna have to beat you to tar like I did when we were 12? And I'm like, yep, okay, sure, I totally buy this character now.
I feel like he's a very stereotypical American, as the Victorian British would see them. Like, oh yeah, they'll put on airs of being, sophisticated or whatever, but you press them, suddenly the bumpkin jumps out, and you're like, ha ha! Found.
Well, and the other thing, I don't entirely know what I think about this, but I have seen some people say, people growing up 50 or 60 years ago, little boys would just get into fights sometimes. And that was a thing that happened, and, mom patched them up, but unless there were serious injuries, no one really got upset about it, and maybe that was a better way to live. And I'm like,
I don't know about you, I was growing up quite a bit more recently than 50 or 60 years ago. We still did that.
Well, it's
Some of the funniest
it's
stories I have are about all the kids I punched at church camp.
I rarely use.
I got it 2 fights in a row, standing in the line to go into the sanctuary where they're getting her marshaled up. This one kid kept hitting me in the back of the head with like a ball cap or something. It hurt. I told him 3 times. I was like, "Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Or I'm going to punch you in the face." Then he looked me right in the eye, did it again. So I belted him in the face.
See, I don't think we ever used fists, but we knew exactly, like, of all the various types of trees where I lived, we knew exactly which trees had branches that wouldn't just snap if you hit somebody over the head with one. So yeah, there's an art form there really that gets passed on from kid to kid.
Yeah, you got to know how to have the scrape.
Mm-hmm.
But like I was saying, like it seems like today childhood is much more tightly managed,
Yeah.
and perhaps padded would be a good way of expressing it, and that's
More K-type
probably
than R-type, perhaps.
yeah, that's. I usually associate. Well, wait, no.
K-type
Wait.
is you have very few children and you invest a lot of resources and care into each one of them individually. And R-type is you have a lot of children, but you don't keep quite as close an eye on them.
Yeah,
And they're more left to fend for themselves.
and I guess that's I usually hear that explained in the like most people who talk about that are very firmly on the K is the K type is better side.
I've
And
seen it brought up a lot. I'm not as convinced as they, perhaps.
I don't believe in helicopter parenting. I believe in predator drone parenting. I'm going to watch you from a distance, and if you do something that displeases me, I'm going to hit you with a missile. I don't need to be right on top of you. You'll know when my displeasure arrives. But yeah, of course, I've also got 5 going on 6 kids. So.
Oh well, there you go. Yeah. I'm told past a certain point you start off double teaming when you have just one, and then it's man to man, and then it's zone defense, and then I think it's just it's all out full court press when you get past like 5.
Well, also if you have them spaced out, a certain way, at a certain point, if you did things right, the older ones should be able to help you manage the younger ones if you did things right up to that point.
That you get defectors. They stop playing against you and kind of come onto your team. But our whole team was going to be 8 this year, so.
But one thing, so like okay, in the obviously through most of the book, it's in the middle of the African jungle, and then it's kind of funny in the sequels, like several of them start out in America or England, and then like inevitably somehow they get dragged back to Africa, and not just Africa, but like lost in the jungle and all this stuff.
Not even just lost in the African jungle, which it's lost in this specific part, the African jungle. You see, that's the most sort of otherworldly part about this is the specific, ontological gravity of John Greystoke the first cabin that he built is that everybody who matters ends up in that cabin by accident at some point.
I'm guessing the cabin, no matter how many years or decades pass by in the sequel, the cabin's still standing.
Yep. Up until
that was good work. I don't know if I could make a cabin that good with just like pieces of crates and old sailcloths. That's really good workmanship.
Like he cut boughs out of trees and like he used like native timber and stuff. And so I mean, set up above the ground like it would season rather than rot. Seasoned wood is very tough. Why we do it?
All right, that actually,
Barring a
so
hurricane or a fire, you're probably okay.
so it did mention at the beginning that it was raised off the ground about 10 feet, and yet every kind of animal can just pace around it and be poking in through the windows and so forth. I wasn't quite clear on that later on in the story about whether it was off the ground or not.
Most of them sort of walk around under it and make a bunch of noises. There is that one point where the lions show up and they somehow get onto the platform, but I forget how they manage that.
Okay.
Well, I get the impression there's a kind of porch around it, or a ledge around the outside is where that's happening. Although they still have to get up. They still have to get up there, which is another thing. Yeah, it's what was I gonna say? The I lost it from. One thing that's kind of interesting in the later chapters, and you also see some of this play out in the sequels, is Tarzan arrives among other the civilized peoples, and like him trying to figure out how all of this works, and it's kind of funny, and it's kind of it's entertaining seeing Tarzan try to fit in among the Europeans, and it's like, oh yes, well, like what is it? Yeah, I could go out and hunt down a lion. And he's like, what? Just with your in your underwear and with a knife? And he's like, oh yeah, totally. You want to make a bet?
And Darnell's only contribution was to tell him, oh yeah, don't make the bet for 5,000. That's too low. Make it for 10,000. I love that. I love that bit. Like he knows he knows A, this is stupid. B, Tarzan's going to be able to do it anyway. So there's no point trying to talk him out of it. So you know what? I'll make sure he gets a good deal out of the whole thing.
I got to admit, man, Tarzan and are a good pair. Like that is a good wingman set.
Yes.
You can imagine, you can just imagine this world where, Jane Porter marries John Clayton. They never leave England. They're okay. And he just wanders around with Darno having adventures. And, you got Tarzan, hulking God man. And there's, the slender, the sleek and, stylish Frenchman just kind of there, over his shoulders, smoking a cigarette and being disdained from people who don't understand how screwed they are to mess with Tarzan. And it would be an awesome thing.
It would work. It would absolutely work.
Yeah.
Well, Nate, maybe you should start writing those stories.
The year is 1889. Jane Clayton is happily wedded. Tarzan, disgruntled, crouches over crouches over a dingy bar in a port of Mozambique. When he hears a familiar step behind him and turning, spies his good friend, Monsieur Darno. Tarzan, mon ami, it's not the place for you to rot and waste yourself. Come.
Oh, of course. And of course we even have to have the I'm too old for this because, as far as Tarzan's concerned, a 25-year-old ape is like on the brink of ancient.
Yeah.
So we can even pull that trope in, and he's being basically pulled out of retirement at the ripe old age of 27. Yeah, there's a lot you could do with this. There's a narrative device. The very first time it mentions that John Clayton had a brother was after the ceremony with the apes when Tarzan was eating the raw flesh, and it said, and then Lord Greystoke wiped his greasy fingers upon his naked thighs and took up the trail of Kulanga, the son of Mabunga the king. While in far-off London, another Lord Greystoke, the younger brother of the real Lord Greystoke's father, sent back his chops to the closed chef because they were underdone, and when he had finished his repast, he dipped his finger ends into a silver bowl of scented water and dried them upon a piece of snowy damask. It came out of nowhere, and it was a great just interjection to. At some point, obviously, you have to establish that Lord Greystoke had a younger brother who has now inherited the title. And this was just such a fantastic way to do it. He could have done that later when the party arrived on the shore searching for the treasure. But just having this one random paragraph contrasting the two in the middle of it all was fantastic.
There's at least one more reference to the other Lord Greystoke before they actually arrive. I don't remember what it is, but I know like once or twice more.
So that was in what you're thinking of was the next chapter in chapter 11. The forest echoed to the savage and triumphant paean. Birds fell still, and the larger animals and beasts of prey slunk stealthily away, for few there were of all the jungle who sought for trouble with the great anthropoids. And in London, another Lord Greystoke was speaking to his kind in the House of Lords, but none trembled at the sound of his soft voice.
But what was
indictment of your manhood if nobody trembles at the sound of your voice?
Yeah, especially if you have all that political power. Come on, project your voice a little in the grand tradition of the Gracchi brothers of Rome.
Well, that didn't work out too well for either of them, though.
Whether you're not,
you have a good point. Okay,
and your I said people should respect your voice whether it's raised or soft, and maybe fear it more when it's actually low. It's doom that only they will see coming.
Beware my what is it? Oh crud! But oh, beware the English
when Green Lantern's light. I don't think that's
it's when the English grow. But oh, beware my people when my people grow polite. That's the ending.
I see.
Rudyard Kipling at Dona Ferentes, a really fun. One reason I do the poetry series is because like I like showing, by the way, there's a lot more poetry can do than you probably got taught in high school, because how it's taught in high school by this point is kind of awful. And that's basically a poem about
better pronoun than it, because it is everything and it's all true.
But that's at Dona Ferentes is a poem by Rudyard Kipling that's basically about an international bar fight, and it's like, So one thing, kind of interesting, the way this story starts off, and also in, I remember in the Pellucidar books, the first one starts off with the same thing. It starts off with, by the way, I got this story from so-and-so, and I checked these records, and here's how I know all of this is true. And like I said, Pellucidar does the same thing. The Pellucidar books do the same thing. And it's kind of interesting because I don't think that's really a thing that happens anymore. Like, I don't remember reading other more recent stories that have that kind of device at the beginning, and I kind of wonder.
Series of unfortunate events did that. Lemony Snicket claimed that this was all entirely 100% true, and I think Fantastic Beasts did that as well. Not that it's meant to, not that the audience is meant to believe it, but I'm pretty sure they both did it. And the Spider Robinson, the Callahan's Cross Time Saloon, that was he did it well enough there that people did sometimes ask him, "Hey, where's the real Callahans that these stories were based on?" So it's not entirely gone as a trope, I think.
I just got a warning from my device that it will be dying forthwith.
Well,
Hey, I'll have to sign out.
it's
well,
been a pleasure talking with you, Nate.
I actually was about to say, I think we could go on for quite some time talking about this, but we are at an hour and 20 minutes, so at some point we do have to stop, and there are other things demanding our attention, so I think now is as good a time as any. Thank you, Nate, and thank you, Harry, for joining us. Nate, first, are there any last thoughts you want to put in before we close out?
The primary tool that you need to survive is a knife. That much is true. I suggest people read on that matter.
Okay, Harry, how about you? Any last thoughts on this one that you wanted to put in before we close out for the evening?
I think we pretty much covered it.
Okay, well, fantastic book. I enjoyed these. I've read, I think, like I said, 5, possibly 6 of them by now. I highly recommend them. And as we said, pretty close to the beginning, even if you have seen, Disney movie or some other like interpretation, you probably don't really know what the originals are like, and it's worth checking out. Thank you both for joining me tonight, and God be with you.
All right. Have a good night.